day one of the technical sessions at the IFA Mumbai Congress. The IFA Congress is back in India after a gap of 17 years, and it's action-packed schedule. Morning 8 a.m. onwards, 2:30 we've just wound up. And what were the sessions on display today? Shefali, we had cross-border outsourcing, the UA on the panel. Mukesh bhai, we had indirect transfers by you on the panel, and we had a session on VAT. Without wasting any time, I tossed to Shefali. So what were the issues that came up in your session on cross-border outsourcing?
We generally discussed about the taxability of cross-border outsourcing structures and the controversies around the permanent establishment and the profit attribution. It was interesting to see that different countries have adopted different approaches on how to tax the outsourcing structures. There are some countries, they do take a view that there will be a constructive PE, even though technically the structures don't satisfy the PE requirements. Whereas there are some other countries that have taken a view that they would adopt the transfer pricing approach and they would make adjustments on transfer pricing to be able to collect more tax. So in all, it was a very interesting session, and we had a good coverage of most of the outsourcing countries.
Anything from an Indian perspective, because this issue has been quite litigated, if I am not wrong?
It has been, but incidentally and interestingly, we had more discussion around the Spanish cases because they have been more controversial than even India. So
they've been more pro-taxpayer or pro-revenue?
Guess, take a guess.
Pro-taxpayer?
It was more pro-revenue.
Spanish.
Yes.
Mukesh bhai, indirect transfers, I think 4 years back only India was discussing it. Now the world is talking about it. You had China, Chile, Spain, you had panelists from all across the world talking about what the situation was in their country.
Correct. So contrary to perceptions of people in India, this topic is no longer restricted to India or post-Vodafone situation. There are many countries that are facing this situation. So it's become kind of an international debate. And so really what we had in our session was 3-4 aspects. One, every country faces the same challenges that India has faced, whether from a jurisdiction standpoint, tax authorities can they assume a right to bring such transactions to tax in India? The second aspect dealt with domestic policies. Many countries, particularly Israel, China, India, have gone ahead and legislated in their domestic law outside of specific anti-avoidance and general anti-avoidance provision, bringing to charge such transactions. So that was a second challenge that we dealt with. The third was really international treaty issues. Now you cannot examine taxability of these transactions divorce of the treaty provisions. So interplay of treaty is important, which is where we analyze the UN and the OECD model convention as to how do you specifically deal with indirect transfer issues, because all of these treaties are dealing with indirect transfer of shares in the context of transfer of immovable property. And the last segment really dealt with enforceability aspects, and enforceability aspects has again two angles to it. One is domestic angle. For example, how does a country go about imposing withholding tax obligations, particularly on a non-resident, and whether that's extraterritorial or not. And from an international standpoint, two aspects. One, seeking information from countries for bringing such indirect transfers to tax in a source jurisdiction, and two, if those transactions are eventually held to be taxable, how do states then coordinate as a part of that treaty network for assistance in collection of taxes? So really,
we must talk about China, Mukesh, because there was a slide on China where I saw Circular 698, and how China too is getting aggressive on indirect transfer, and there seems to be a thrust on substance over form. Am I right?
Correct. But China also, like India, they bring their charging provision through the administrative Circular 689 route. India has amended the law. I think, subtle difference between India and China is India kind of imposes a charging obligation. So the onus then shifts to the taxpayer to come to the conclusion after reading the law that they are indeed liable for tax on such indirect transfers. Whereas in China, there's an obligation to make a filing requirement. And after the filing requirement, the tax authorities assess the taxes. So there are subtle differences between both the regulations.
I'm joined by my colleague Ameya as well. Anything you caught in the first two sessions which was extremely interesting? Shefali told us that Spanish cases were the flavor of the day in cross-border outsourcing.
Yes, absolutely. First I'll deal with Mukesh bhai's sessions which just got concluded. I think a couple of very interesting comments. One is the whole indirect transfer debate under Section 9, which we are talking about in India, gets a different dimension once GAR comes into effect. And therefore, the issues that we are talking about today, the perspective will be widened once the GAR comes into effect, because then even you could potentially have a overridden treaties being overridden, because GAR overrides treaties as per the current Indian provision. So that's a very interesting aspect. And on the indirect transfer issue, very interesting Mukesh bhai's analysis on how Israel introduced the law on indirect transfer in 2009, much before when we started talking about it in India. So India is not alone in this. That was very interesting. And on the first issue of outsourcing, which was discussed, it's very relevant even in today's context, given the Make in India policy of the government. And one key aspect that has come out is that there is no uniform law around outsourcing tax issues. So that's very interesting. And one last point, we did a quick survey of the tax heads among what are the critical issues around outsourcing in India, the tax issues. And transfer pricing, majority, almost 95% have said that transfer pricing is one of the key area. So transfer pricing and attribution will continue to be key for India and rest of the developing countries.
We ran that survey last Thursday, so very interesting that Ameya says transfer pricing is the key issue.
It is perhaps, as I said, outsourcing, they've always said that it is more cost advantage driven. And if the tax controversies start to hound the businesses, it will dilute the arbitrage in the outsourcing jurisdictions. So both transfer pricing as well as profit attribution will play a key role on how India and some other countries retain their competitive edge.
Mukesh bhai, any session you're looking forward to in the next couple of days?
Well, I'm looking out. Besides the judges seminar, I'm looking out for the second scientific topic, because the scientific topics are the topics that are well researched. There are authoritative papers given by branch reporters and reviewed by general reporters, and they run a session on that, like we saw the first scientific topic in today's Shefali's session in the morning. So the second scientific topic is equally important, which is tomorrow morning. I'm looking forward to that.
We surely can't be shying away from BEPS, and of course the one session which is the highlight of every IFA Congress, recent developments in international taxation. I think that's coming up on the last day.
That's right. So besides the two scientific topics, the BEPS session, the UN OECD session, and the recent international tax developments are the more interesting ones. Actually, all the events are of relevance to Indian audience. So other than the EU event, they all are very, very interesting topics that have been chosen for this year's Congress.
So the plenary session tomorrow morning is qualification of taxable entities and treaty protection. My colleague Ameya will be covering, of course, and we'll hear expert inputs from Shefali and Mukesh tomorrow as well, and we'll be joined by a special guest tomorrow afternoon as well. Till then, goodbye. We'll see you after day 2 of the technical sessions at the IFA Congress. Goodbye from Mumbai. Thank you.